everyone, and welcome to another episode of Captive Minds. My name is Max Perry, and I'm an independent journalist based in Baltimore, Maryland. If you're not familiar, my work is currently featured in Covert Action magazine. My latest being the second installment in a two-part series on the backstory of 9/11 I did. Also featured in CAM is the work of my co-host and our producer, Shaenah Batterson, who joins us from an undisclosed location on the East Coast. Hey, Shaenah.
Hi, Max. It's good to be back for another episode.
Yeah, this week we have a special guest joining us. It's been a little while since we had a guest. And if you're not familiar, his name is Billy Bob, and he is the host of another terrific show or YouTube live stream rather, that's called Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline, which I would recommend everyone check out. And his show has featured a number of great guests and commentators, including myself, several occasions. He's been kind enough to have me on his show several times, and it's about damn time I returned the favors. But actually, Shayna was the one who actually had the initial idea for you to come on. I'd been, like we were discussing before we started recording, I wanted to have you on as a guest eventually, but I was waiting for the right occasion, and then Shayna came across a terrific little piece you'd written recently on China. She forwarded it to me, and so I thought that was the perfect opportunity to finally invite you on our show and pick your brain and get your thoughts on things that are happening. Well, there's so much happening right now, obviously. But in case our viewers and listeners don't know, Billy Bob is also you're a prolific political commentator and polemicist, and you've published. I was glad to see you've been publishing some of your analysis on Substack, not just hosting the Blowback live stream. And you've also been doing a lot of AI generated Marxist-Leninist agitprop on social media, which is a topic we wanted to delve into in our interview and discussion today as well. But Billy Bob, thank you for coming on Captive Minds. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you for the invite, Max. And it's been like a 10 to 1 ratio. It's like you've been on my show 10 times. This is the first invite. But
Yeah.
I was the bigger person and I showed up. And so I'm gonna
Well, I
I
owe
thought
you
that was a
one or 10, I guess. No, I mean, I've been following your work for a long time, and your political analysis generally. I mean, I think I first became aware of you actually. I want to say it was around the time of the 2020 election, maybe. I mean, specifically, I think we were connected on social media before that, but I remember around that time you gave this really good analysis. I think it was just a social media post of like this assessment of the whole Trump phenomenon and the reason why he was politically successful and what he symbolized or represented as as far as why the political establishment was seemingly doing everything it could at that time anyway to prevent his reelection. And you put that in the perspective of in the broader context of what he represented as far as like being a symptom of an empire in decline, which obviously correlates with the title of your live stream show.
yeah.
And you just gave this great breakdown of why the political establishment at the time was pulling out all the stops to try and prevent him from continuing to accelerate that collapse, of the American empire. And I remember Patrice Granville, who was the first alt media editor to like publish my work. He cross-posted your I believe it was a social media post at his website, the Granville Post, and that's like my earliest memory of like really becoming aware of like, okay, this guy's got something interesting to say. And then shortly after that, or subsequently, you started the Blowback live stream, and we've since had many great discussions on that show. So I guess my first question for you sort of relates to that, in that I wanted to ask you about now that now that Trump finally did get reelected and we're what, over a year into this, year and a half into his second term, I guess in terms of how it's gone thus far in terms of accelerating, the US empire's fading dominance that the title of your show references. What is your diagnosis in terms of not just that, but how much has he, given that he's gone back on so many of those isolationist campaign pledges he made? Do you think that he's been fully absorbed into the establishment now, or was he part of the status quo all along? What do you think about that?
That's a great question, Max. Um, relax, get situated, because I'm gonna break it all down. I don't know. I think, I when we look back and look at what happened in his first term and then his promises to get a second term, I think the best explanation is that he represented a minority faction of the ruling oligarchy, and at first the majority faction opposed him, but then I think he gradually won some people over, and they kind of settled on a plan that involved Trump and a strategy. So I think what's going on was intended from the very beginning. Like, I kind of think it's part of an approach to maintaining Western global dominance. And there was a disagreement over the best approach, right? And so there was an internal class struggle about how to best approach what's going on. And Trump represented a minority at first, and subsequently he became a majority. And I first realized that he was probably going to win the second election. Maybe it was about September or so before the November election, and you just really saw a little bit of a difference. And he wasn't being attacked as virulently, and you could kind of see that, oh, whoa, there's been like a change in how they're talking about him, how they're dealing with him. Like, I think they want him in. He's the new consensus, representative. Um, and so, yeah. So what is the agenda? What do they want? What explains all the things we're seeing? What explains his promises? He was telling everybody everything they wanted to hear. No new wars. We're going to rebuild the America. We're going to focus on our country. We're going to, bring back jobs. We're going to reindustrialize. We're going to deal with immigration, which was a popular political football, because most people, don't like open borders. And so he knew that was a winning thing. So all these promises, for various reasons, but they were all appealing to, an electorate that, he understood what they wanted to hear. And so he had no problem telling everybody what they wanted to hear, when the actual strategy involved doing things that would really, really, really be unpopular if he was honest about them. And so this is kind of just how, politics works. I subscribe to a particular framework. I call it, Marxist framework, Marxist-Leninist framework, where society is really divided along class interests. There's no such thing as a national interest. That's a liberal fantasy. There's the interest of the working class majority, and there's the interest of the owning class minority. And the government essentially is just the representative of the ownership class minority, the rich minority, the oligarchs. So, but they have to pretend otherwise, right? They can't just say that. And so they create this facade of political theater, where they pretend to have two different parties, and then they play each other off, and they want people to buy into this idea that politics consists of supporting one oligarch party against the other oligarch party, when in reality, Marxists, we know that politics consists of overthrowing the representatives of the ownership class and replacing it with a government that represents the working class majority. That idea is nowhere to be found in the West. Like, people don't understand that. People they've had the idea of class really erased from their minds. So what I like to do is spread awareness. I like to share this understanding, this framework about what's going on, and to explain why we need to, not support either of the, duopolistic parties, and really advocate for substantial, significant change, which isn't along the lines of any individual policy, and so the liberals, they just all get caught up in policies, individual policies, and then, supporting, well, the Democrat supports more policies than I do, but so I'm going to support them. So the lesser of two evils is what they end up trying to preach to people. So, but here's the thing: the West is in terminal decline. The United States, I would consider the headquarters of a transnational, global, Western, really, a transnational Western oligarchy. It used to be headquartered in Europe. It used to be in England, and then World War II saw that headquarters transfer to the United States. But the system that they created, the Bretton Woods system, following the end of World War II, and then the petrodollar following, the 70s, that
Yeah.
system is no longer benefiting the Western oligarchs, and they're realizing that they have to do something. And the primary reason that they have to do something is the rise of China, and the fact that China is going to displace their wealth, power, and privilege. And so they are really, anxious, apoplectic, trying to figure out, what can we do about this rising power? It's sovereign. We can't control it. We don't want that. We don't want that in our lives. We need to secure the planet and the next century, secure it for our own interests. And to do that, we have to take down China. So that is really what is animating everything that we're seeing, and I think it explains the Trump phenomenon, and so that's the key to understanding everything. I mean, to me, the pursuit of monopoly power, total global hegemony, is their ultimate driver. The driving things for the Western oligarchs, the driving interest, for the Western oligarchy, and then. With respect to how do you achieve that, it's contain, isolate, and weaken China. So that's the overall context that we have to understand when we're trying to make sense of what's going on. But does that lead you into another question, or you want me to just ramble forward?
Yeah, I have a question about in regards to Trump because with what you're saying about him representing a certain faction of the ruling class, and I'm curious if you think that, and I know other people have made this comparison, if Trump represents a Bonapartist figure in the Marxist sense of that term. What do you think about that?
I'm, like Ramin Mazahari said, Bonaparte was actually progressive for his time. He makes that argument. And so I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Bonaparte than I am to Trump. I don't really like that analogy. I know the article you referenced that for Patrice Greenville for the Greenville Post, he actually put an image of Trump dressed up as Bonaparte. That wasn't my image, because Bonaparte kind of did, I mean, I guess he saved the existing order, but he did so by being a little bit progressive. And I don't see Trump as being progressive. Like I see him as, just I mean, that would be my answer.
He's
I
certainly
mean,
not reintroducing like meritocracy or some of the things that you could argue Napoleon did, or even, I mean, you could obviously say that Napoleon was an expansionist in many respects, but as far as like trying to export the revolution throughout, or the values of the revolution throughout the rest of Europe. Certainly Trump's not doing anything on that level, but he is, I think the definition of Bonapartism that Shayna's referring to is sort of more like what the way Lacerdo uses it. But yeah, it's a complex I mean, there's many different ways you could interpret Bonapartism, but like I think that he is a Bonapartist in the sense that clearly, I mean, I would describe him as sort of like a failed Bonapartist because they're almost trying to use him to save the system from collapsing, but it's not working. And certainly there's not nothing progressive being introduced like what you were saying. I mean, it's just more like he's just the empire with the mask off fully, and it's accelerating that collapse.
And I give Bonaparte more agency. I don't think Trump has a lot of agency. And to the direct point, I think Trump is going to be the arsonist and the scapegoat. So I think they want Trump. They're using Trump to do all these things that are going to be very unpopular. Right now, you can see that he's really trying to delay, like he's really trying to do whatever he can to keep economic pain, to keep the global economy okay, to keep the price of oil, okay. So he's really working hard to, make sure that we don't feel like we're in a crisis. But I think that it's a delaying tactic until they feel the time is right to implement the crisis, and then we'll be in crisis mode. And I think the idea is that once we get to crisis mode, the Democrats, of course, are going to be blaming Trump for the crisis, which exculpates the oligarchy, the ruling class. Trump personally is going to be blamed, and then but also they want him to get us to the crisis. So again, so they can blame him. And so I think that right now, we haven't seen the actual crisis yet. Right now, we're seeing things. We're seeing a shaping of the global battlefield. We're seeing, a monopoly of energy. We're seeing a decrease in the amount of available energy. And but we're also seeing this managed, right? It's being managed very carefully, not to allow a too big of a crash, too big of a collapse. So they're working very hard to stabilize the markets, to keep the price of oil within. And then they're even pretending, right? They're pretending we got an MOU, we're going to have an agreement, but again, I'm quite certain that that is all theater, that there is really no interest or no desire to, have any kind of agreement with Iran that's not Iran just surrendering, right? And so Iran doesn't need to surrender because they won the actual war. And so, and they understand, Iran is smart. They understand that they're not gonna, they don't want to lose the peace. But the US is promising them, all kinds of things, if only, so they're trying to bribe them, right? So, I mean, what they failed to achieve militarily, they're going to try and achieve through bribery. Hey, you got to stop supporting your proxies. You got to give up your nuclear energy. And if you do that, like we'll reinvest in your country, and we'll make will normalize relations in the, so all of these things. And this is, this is the empire just doing whatever it can in a very difficult situation, that they don't have a lot of power, right? So they militarily, they've realized they probably can't destroy Iran. But what they could do was, they could take a lot of cause a lot of damage to the global energy supply, and they could also attain a monopoly. So we saw that, they did in Europe, they made Europe dependent on U.S. energy, especially natural gas, and same with Asia. And so we're having record profits for U.S. oil energy companies. So this is what has materially been accomplished so far. And so a lot of people who are saying, hey, Iran won, the West lost, ha ha ha. I think there's more to it. And I think the more to it is you got to look at the bigger picture that involves China. You got to look at it strategically. And the U.S. is the U.S. giving up? Are they accepting multipolarity? Because that is what will inevitably happen. That is what needs to happen. But that hasn't happened yet. And so the West, the United States, is still involved in an effort to, be the unipolar hegemon and to destroy China, or at least isolate and weaken China. And there's a whole huge strategy in place. The first and second island chain, the all the military we have in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and the Philippines. It's like a noose that we've heavily invested in over decades, and I don't think we're going to just give up without giving it, rolling the dice on that. And so I think that's the future. The question is that going to be in this year? Is it going to be before the midterms, after the midterms, or are they going to roll it out, maybe the next administration after Trump's gone. I don't know if these things are established. I think they're probably dependent on variables. So, but the trajectory is clear, and the objective is clear of what they want to accomplish. And it's also clear that they have not resigned themselves to the fact that these efforts are futile, and we're just going to, resign ourselves to multipolarity, which of course is what needs to happen and what should happen. But again, I argue we have a global capitalist system, and that would be the immediate death of the global capitalist system. Once they agree to multipolarity, I think that is the quick destruction of the West, and that's why they're trying to prolong their lifespan by engaging in all these crazy things.
Well,
That's counterintuitive. That's a little bit counterintuitive, and people don't appreciate that. But I think from their perspective, multipolarity is unacceptable. Like just resigning themselves to accepting China as a peer rival and inevitably a greater power. I mean, I can argue they're already a greater power, but that is unacceptable, because once you accept that, you're done. And so that's what they're trying to avoid. So it's a rock and a hard place. It's like they have to defeat China, but China's undefeatable. On the other hand, they can't admit that. And so what's going on is the inevitable response to these two facts.
Yeah, you were in regard to the whole Napoleon analogy. I mean, I've seen other political commentators like Yasha Levine comparing Trump to being like the Yeltsin of the United States, which is, uh, I think, that's also sort of appropriate in the way that he's overseeing this collapse. And but as you were pointing out, that the ruling establishment is using him as an excuse to ram through all this stuff that's been a bipartisan agenda for years, as far as austerity and all that goes. And then they can point the finger at him and say, make him the fall guy. But you mentioned a lot of commentators are sort of prematurely diagnosing this latest tentative Iran deal as a sign, or an obvious sign of purely Iran's obvious victory in this few months long war. Do you feel like people are also jumping to conclusions, or perhaps being premature when, like, for example, I've seen a number of commentators suggesting that the fact that Trump has finally, seemingly, at least for the time being, capitulated and agreed to terms that do seemingly very much benefit Tehran, that is somehow proof that Israel does not have the collateral over his head, or the whether it's blackmail material vis-a-vis Epstein or whatever. I've seen a lot of people jumping to the conclusion, like Aaron Mate, for example, was saying that this is somehow evidence that Israel doesn't have anything over his head, and that U.S. presidents are not, that he's not being sexually blackmailed, or that that ultimately that isn't as big of a factor as people have made it out to be, as this war has gone on, and he reversed his isolationist campaign pledges. Do you think people are jumping to conclusions about that?
So the MOU, yeah, I guess there's a 14-point document that everybody agrees on, and by definition, that's tantamount to U.S. surrender to
Mhm.
Iran, and there's no way around that. I think in reality, of course, it's a delaying tactic. The U.S. has no intent to follow through on any of that. And again, I think they're delaying, and they're managing the markets, and right now they're letting the market stabilize, right? Because pretending to go along with this helps to stabilize the markets. But I think in the future it's going to go back, and we've just seen this back and forth where Trump says we're going to destroy you, and the next day we're going to have peace. And so this is just managing. It's a managed decline of the markets, getting us to a point of crisis, which is again coming in the future, because I don't think the U.S. has any interest or intent to surrender to Iran. Like they haven't made that decision yet. And so that's why the MOU is a worthless, propaganda thing that everybody talks about. But if I have opinions on Israel, and I want to, I mean, let me just say my understanding of Israel. So I have a framework. My framework involves classes as being the primary actors instead of nation states, right? So nation states are owned and controlled by the transnational oligarchy. So the Western nation states, Europe, Israel, the United States, Australia, Japan, South Korea, these are nation states owned by the Western oligarchy. And the Western oligarchy uses nation states to further their oligarchic class interests, right? So this is not a liberal framework. I argue this is a Marxist framework. And so if we look at what's going on with Israel through that framework, we just dismiss the idea that Israel has a national interest that it's pursuing and that it has conquered our nation and it is, getting our nation to pursue their national interest at the expense of our nation's national interest. That's a common liberal framework and a way of understanding and analyzing things that I don't think has any value, because I think if you think in those terms, you don't really understand what's going on and you're going to come to a misdiagnosis. So on the surface, using that framework, you can't help but to conclude, yeah, Israel has captured the United States political system, and they are using the political system of the United States to further the interests of Israel at their own expense, to their own detriment. And I don't think that's very useful. So my framework says, you got a transnational oligarch class, and they own Israel. They own the United States, and they use these nations. They use their economies, they use their militaries, they use their political policies to pursue the hegemonic class interests of the transnational Western oligarchy. And so it's like, so Israel and the United States to me are the same thing. You might as well call Israel the 51st state. They're geographically detached. They're on the front lines of a regional, of a region that's very important to Western imperialism. And so, I would say that, I would agree with Aaron Mata. If that's like, I haven't listened to Aaron for a while. I think he's great. I'm glad he left Democracy Now. He, I think he's got some limitations. I think just he embraces a little bit too much of this liberal framework that again sees everything in terms of nation states. And this liberal realism kind of championed by John Mearsheimer that purports to explain things and gives motives for what's going on. And basically what they all end up doing is it doesn't make any sense. Why is the US doing this? And the liberals just pull their hair out. I watch them constantly. This is just the stupidest thing they're doing. And again, I think that to me that is not explanatory, and I think my framework much better explains why we're doing certain things that intuitively seem to be against our national interest. It's because there is no such thing as a national interest. It's a class interest. And if you think that their class interest is total global domination and the containment and isolation and weakening of China, then you can kind of see better what's going on. So Israel, I think, is empowered. Israel has been empowered because they are pursuing an imperialist strategy that is in complete, total alignment with what the owners of the United States want. Because again, the owners of the United States, the owners of Israel, I argue, are the same people. And so now, obviously Netanyahu has a different constituency. He has to sell policies to different people that Trump has to sell policies to. And so he has a whole different, line of theater and a whole different set of lies that he has to sell the Israeli people from what Trump has to sell, the American people. But ultimately they're working together. And I don't really see, I don't know. Definitely there is an effort to, force and influence politicians, individual politicians, to be beholden to the strategy. To not go off course, to not, embrace their own power and use that power to the detriment of the oligarchy, of the imperial interests. And so I fully believe that, yeah, they have blackmail on all these people. But I don't feel like Trump is, I don't think they have to use that against Trump. I think Trump is all on board. I don't think that Trump is somebody that they have to threaten. But who knows? I mean, maybe there is some of that. Maybe there is some, some influencing going on of that nature. I doubt it. I don't know. I mean, like,
Well,
do they
I
have?
just have seen a number of people, because that's just sort of been the consensus almost for months that the way that Trump continues to, no matter how badly things are going, like just continue to double down on the Iran war, even like with the destruction to the US economy that it's causing, the impact it's having, that, I mean, arguably, like I've seen a number of political commentators not necessarily saying that the entire US support for Israel is contrary to American interests, but that the way that this war is being conducted and the prolonging of it, the fact that the US public support for Israel is plummeting, and yet they're continuing to just double down, and they're not, and it's just continuing to backfire and blow up in their faces. I've seen, it seemed like for months people were saying, oh, well, Trump must be doing this because they have this on him. But since this deal, this very tentative, as you were saying, likely pure theatrics, this deal that was made probably to save face as far as like the bulletin points that were put out, the talking points. I've seen a number of people like Mate just jumping to the conclusion that, oh, well, this must mean that the idea that they had blackmail on him was a conspiracy theory or something. So I guess that's more what I was referring to. But it was good to get your
Well,
breakdown.
no, and I
I,
would go ahead, Shayna.
I was going to say, I like what you were saying about the difference between a liberal and a Marxist framework. And I think the attitude of that Israel has so much control of the United States obviously can then lend itself to this sort of revived Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy thing where they're, misdiagnosing the ruling capitalist class as this conspiracy of Jewish communists. But people oftentimes, I feel like, ignore the fact that Israel is materially dependent upon the United States' support for its survival. I mean, it's sur fairly surrounded by hostile states, and it's fairly small. It needs the US's military might behind it to survive.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask you, I mean, in regards of Trump's recent supposed deals with Iran, do you think that the time is coming because with the ongoing genocide and public support for Israel being really low, do you think the time is coming where Netanyahu will sort of be thrown under the bus, so as to preserve the teetering reputation of Israel, if it's even salvageable?
So I I think no, I agree with you. I agree with you. There is definitely a decrease in the level of support for Israel. Even regular people are seeing Israel as being a problem and being, not a victim, but an aggressor. And it's interesting. So in my lifetime, this is unprecedented, and the kind of media coverage,
Yeah.
the negative media coverage that Israel is getting from the establishment press is totally unprecedented. And so the question is why? So I think with my framework, like I can make sense of it insofar as, it's a proxy. Israel is just a usable, expendable proxy for the Western oligarch class, just like Ukraine, right? Ukraine, we're taught to support Ukraine, but I think that they are happy to kind of get the focus off of the Western oligarchy themselves and get people to, in the future, get people to blame Israel and or Trump for, again, for a future catastrophe, which I truly believe is on the very close horizon. So we're kind of talking, it's 1939, and we're suggesting that there could be a big thing that happens pretty soon, and millions and millions of people could die, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I kind of think that we're maybe in a place like that right now. And again, how are things going to be explained in the future? I think that explanation could involve blaming Trump, and then also, blaming Netanyahu personally or blaming the state of Israel. And again, this is a way to write history that ignores the reality of the class dynamic. And so it's a liberal bourgeois history that future liberals can write and teach in their schools to their children, which again has very little to do with what actually the actual dynamics that took place. So we can see the parallels in World War II, right? The fascists were funded in Germany and Italy because those were the two places that had the strongest socialist domestic population. And so the fascists were put in place to attack the domestic socialists and then also to be launched against the heartland of socialism in the Soviet Union. And so that, history isn't what is taught in schools. It's a liberal bourgeois history. And that's focused on, oh, you know what? Chamberlain just wanted peace and he was stupid. And we know now that we cannot negotiate with dictators. But Chamberlain was a good intentioned peacemonger, and that's wrong. So anyway, liberals just they create their own false history, and then they draw false false things to learn. What's a synonym for things to learn? False conclusions, about their false history, and that's how it works. So no, I think they might be setting that up, right? So they might be setting up. So there's a think tank, Which Path to Persia from 2009 or 2011, and there's a whole set of paragraphs on an approach, a strategy called "Blame It on Bibi." We want to attack Iran, we want to destroy Iran. How can we get away with that? Well, we could blame it on Bibi, and then they explain how. And so
Wow.
they could be
Wasn't
setting
aware of
something.
that.
Say that again.
I wasn't aware of that, this think tank. It was like
Yeah,
a report that was put out.
I think the Brookings Institute, I
Okay.
believe. And it was, called Which Path to Persia, I think 2011. And then there's a whole section called Blame It on Bibi. They really, it's a comprehensive document. I mean, that was just one of a number of strategies that they laid out for attacking and destroying Iran. So the sea change is interesting, but I don't know. I think we have to dismiss the liberal framework. We have to look through it through the class lens that I'm kind of advocating for here, and where we don't really see nations as sovereign actors pursuing their own national interests. Like I just don't think that's how the world behaves. And so when you're caught in that framework, you're just never going to make sense of what's really going on, and you're going to inevitably come to conclusions like, oh, Israel must have taken over the U.S. political system, and I don't think that's not what's going on. But so we'll see. Yeah, I mean, there's a big shift, anti-Israeli shift, anti-Netanyahu shift, and it could be that is used and really seized upon in a future catastrophe that who knows what's going to cause it. But I think everybody kind of understands and agrees that if we bomb Iran one more time, we're really going to set back their energy export infrastructure for years to come. And they would retaliate, do the same things to the Gulf states, and they would severely harm Israel as well. But essentially, that would take all of the Middle Eastern oil offline for years to come, irrevocably, right? It's like even if peace came the next day, it would take them years to get back. So this would create a global energy deficit, and it would further increase the amount of monopoly that the United States has over the global energy market. And then when you look at how we're trying to control all of these specific choke points and strategic waterways with our Navy, like the second island chain and first island chain, and the Gulf area with our blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and then also the Panama Canal, and just basically everywhere, in a future crisis, it seems like this is kind of the trajectory that they're taking us. And so let me just say this also. People think it's counterintuitive that the West, the United States, would be interested in causing harm to the global economy that they themselves are the most influential people in creating, right? Because the current global system is, basically created, U.S. dollar reserve is the reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, and so people are like counterintuitive. Well, why are you trying to harm this system if it's your own system? And I just think the answer is that it's the system is it's not functioning like the West just isn't benefiting from it anymore. And if they don't do something, China is, just beating them at their own game. And so I don't know, that kind of gets me onto the article that I wrote about two different systems and how the United States is really trying to turn itself into more of a command economy, like China has a command economy, but just a command economy that's serving the opposite class. And so, the West, the United States, has always preached free markets and privatization, deregulation, and just letting the market, be the market. And I mean, that's been the mantra for decades. And now we see that that's kind of, all of that whole narrative is kind of falling apart. And you see the United States doing the opposite, and they're doing it because they realize that they can't compete with China. Like the Western system is not able to compete with China. And so again, if we're looking at the big picture where the Western oligarchs are pursuing global hegemony and they're trying to defeat any sovereign threat to their hegemony, they would like to do it economically. They would like to just beat China, but they're not able to. So China's economy, where the commanding heights of the economy, the banks, the military industrial complex, the biggest industries, iron and extractive industries, are all owned by the state, publicly owned by the party. They're able to really be strategic about how their economy develops. And so, and they're very adept, and they can respond to any kind of crisis in a real robust way that, again, the West just can't compete with that. And so you kind of see the West is trying to do the same thing, right? They're trying to consolidate the wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands so that they can have more of a command economy where they can better address the challenges, where it's not just chaos, it's not just anarchy of the market, but you have, an intelligentsia at the top looking at what's going on and really being adept at responding to those threats and challenges and changes. But again, all in the interest of the ownership class, whereas in China, they are developing and they are managing their economy in the interest of the working class.
Well, I hope
And
we
so,
at least get some high-speed rail out of it, you know.
no, absolutely not. Like again, the oligarchs aren't going to be using high-speed rail.
Yeah.
That's a waste. That is a total waste. So no, that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, China, the largest high-speed rail system in the world, very user-friendly, just as fast as planes. Hundreds of millions of people traveling those rails every day, connecting commerce, connecting families. It's all kinds of good for the working class, but not a lot of good for the oligarchs. And that's why in this country we've never invested in that, because that kind of infrastructure is wasteful. It's not profitable. And when your entire economy, your whole global system hinges on accumulating profit for the ownership class, that's the point of it. It's just not competitive with socialism. And so, I thank God for socialism. I mean, China is the proof that socialism is a superior system. And China's victory is inevitable, in my opinion. Like there's really nothing that the West can do to contain or defeat China, in my opinion. But they can't resign themselves to that fact. And so those are the two primary realities that explain the behavior of the West. They don't have a winning hand, they don't have a winning card, but they have to keep playing.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis, and I agree that I think that, the seemingly concerted effort of the Western ruling class to destroy the global economy, it's like we can't let China win, so we'll just blow it all up and we'll bring everyone down with us, is sort of the attitude. And the article you mentioned is actually the article I sent to Max, which, spurred on our inviting you on. I believe it's called The Great Inversion: Why the US is Forced to Copy China While Calling It Evil. And in it, you spoke of how, due to this astounding success of China's socialist market economy, the US is trying to bring more corporate enterprises under state control. I mean, or rather, the state is becoming more and more under the control of corporate enterprises, you could also say, I suppose. But, in order to compete with China. But I really liked how in the article you make sure to point out, however, that this is not the US becoming socialist and make the important distinction of which class rules in China versus, which class rules in the US. And, I know both of us here at Captive Minds certainly agree with your assessment, but I'm just curious, what would you say to, this, because these sorts of views proliferate on the internet. What would you say to those people who, one, view China as a state capitalist dictatorship that's subservient to the Western bourgeoisie, or two, the people who view the United States as being secretly under the control of the CCP, incorrectly called that instead of the CPC for Communist Party of China, who is like introducing woke agenda to destroy America,
The
and
chai
that China
comes. The chai
China's
comes, as Alex Jones calls them.
also, China's also controlled by Soros, even though there's like Soros, I found multiple things. I was researching this, where he's like saying how he's demanding that he's like trying to take Xi Jinping out of power because he just hates how he's an
Well, Open
authentically
Society, the Open
liberating
Society
communism
Institute
or
was
something.
heavily involved. The Open Society Institute was heavily involved in Tiananmen Square massacre, the Tiananmen Square protest, excuse me, not the massacre. There was no massacre, really. Yeah, Soros has been pouring money into civil society organizations to try and get rid of, open China's economy up so he can, as a currency manipulator, profit, and reinstate capitalism. So, I mean, yeah, that's another prevailing myth.
But yeah, so I'm just curious though what you would say to those people who, one, view China as a state capitalist dictatorship, or to the people that, view the United States as secretly coming under the control of China or something, because they're kind of two sides of the same coin in a sense.
So yeah, this will take just an hour. Don't worry, it'll only be an hour and I'll be done. We think about Lasordo, think about Rockhill. These scholars have done great work in deconstructing Western communists, Western leftists, and Western Marxists. So you're kind of just describing the perspective of a typical Western Marxist. And let me just really briefly explain what I don't think they understand. So we understand Lasordo, Rockhill, you guys and me, we understand communism and Marxism to mean a certain thing. And so this meaning is different. Not everybody who calls themselves a communist has the same understanding of what communism is. So there's a disagreement between people who identify as communist or Marxist regarding what these terms actually mean. So this is the fundamental reason that there's disagreement over China. So I would argue that Marxism is like it's a criticism of capitalism. It's an observation of how capitalism works. And then it says certain things are true. And because these things are true, inevitably you're going to have a class struggle. And inevitably, if we're going to progress, that class struggle is going to be won by the working class. And that's what progress looks like. So I think Lenin, right? So how did Lenin describe what socialism is? Lenin said socialism is essentially state capitalist monopoly made to serve all the people. Like that's literally socialism. And socialism itself is a transition stage from capitalism to socialism and then to communism. Now, the mode of production is one aspect of this transition, but there's also the other half of that because it's called a political economy. It's not just so liberals, I would call Western Marxists liberals, they see politics over here and the economics over here. Well, Marxists see it's it's the same thing. It's called political economy. And you can't just speak of a mode of production without talking about who owns the political system. Who is in charge, which class is in charge. So again, I would argue that as any individual society frees itself from the political dominance of the ownership class, like the Soviet Union did, like Cuba did, like China did, like Vietnam did, they have to, that's the important thing, is what class controls the government. And so once you have control of the government, in the hands of a party that represents the working class, there's not a fixed blueprint. Marx didn't write a how-to guide about how to, what you do next. And so it's experimentation and it's adaptation. And what have they had to adapt to? So all of these socialist experiments have had to adapt to siege and capitalist encirclement and constant attack and warfare. And so we've learned a lot. Go ahead, Shaenah.
Oh, I was just gonna cut in and say it reminds me of this quote from Lenin where he sort of, I believe it was Lenin, unless it was Mao, but I believe it was Lenin. I read it in a book. I read so many books, it all blurs together. But where he said that just because, yes, it was Lenin, because he was talking about the new economic policy, and he was saying, if you're climbing a mountain and you turn around to go back down to look for a different path up because you can't keep going up on the path you're going, it doesn't mean you've given up on climbing the mountain. It just means you're trying to find a different
Yeah.
way to get there. And I think that's a great metaphor for how building socialism actually works. You have to see what works and what doesn't and take detours to try to get to your end goal.
The new
And there's
economic
gonna,
policy is also what Lacerdo in his writings on China always cites as far as when people make these assessments or have these misunderstandings about China as, quote unquote, state capitalist, when Lacerda always cites the new economic policy as far as the way that they allowed some elements of a market economy while the state maintained control over it, whether it was, allowing, I guess peasants to sell, surplus grain in open markets or allowing some private retail businesses or whatever, but the state maintained control of major industry, and it's the same exact thing in China. It's just on obviously a much larger scale because their economy has developed so much more than, so the Soviet Union in the early 1920s.
and they learned from history, they learned from the Soviet experience. And there's a misconception in my mind that Mao and Deng, they had different perspectives and on what the Chinese economy should look like. And that, while Mao was a real socialist who wanted pure socialism, Deng wanted capitalism, and for that, Mao had Deng purged, blah blah. So none of that has is true at all, in my opinion. If you look at what Mao was saying in 1945, it was like, hey, we need capitalism. I mean, capitalism is going to be how we develop the productive forces. And so he was constrained by the material conditions, right? And so every socialist government has to navigate the material conditions. And there's not going to be a straight line, and it's not going to be always just success after success. There's going to be failures. And like Shaenah was saying, you're gonna realize, shoot, we got to turn around and go back and look for a different route. And so that's all expected. And to say that because you didn't just plow ahead aimlessly, that you're no longer socialist, is just mindless. It just makes no sense at all. But Mao definitely understood that we wanted foreign investment. We wanted to embrace a measure of capitalism, again, constrained by political power being in the hands of the Communist Party. And so he worked tirelessly to end the Western trade embargo. So there was meetings in Geneva, Switzerland every year for over a decade where China was always raising, hey, let's end the embargo. So it wasn't until the Sino-Soviet split that Kissinger and Nixon thought, yeah, you know what, let's go ahead and we'll pull China away from Russia because they were already, split, and then we'll end our embargo. So once the embargo was ended under Mao, the opening up process began. And actually, Mao called Deng out of exile and made him vice premier after the Western trade embargo was ended. Now, it's true that he re-exiled him a few years later. That's true. But I would argue by then, Mao was just a figurehead and he was
He was
bedridden, and it was the gang.
senile. He
Yeah,
was
the Gang of
senile and
Four
he was
was
being
just,
the Gang of Four and all that.
they
So
had hijacked his legacy, and they were, citing Mao and doing their thing. And luckily, the Communist Party knew better. They understood. But I don't. I see a continuity between what Mao did and then what Deng did. So Deng couldn't have done what he did if it wasn't for what Mao did. And to argue that Mao wouldn't have wanted that to happen is just stupid, because number one, he said the opposite, and the number two, he did the opposite, by lobbying consistently to end the embargo and finally getting it ended. But no, there was definitely a faction, a minority faction within the Communist Party of China that were true believers in the leftist idea of communism. Western Marxism, and real socialism is when everybody's equally impoverished, and we just deny ourselves. We have to, as a matter of principle and what's that word? Dogma. It's just a dogma. We can have no private ownership of the means of production. That's dogmatic. And so Marxism is not dogmatic. Marxism is pragmatic. It's the identification and pursuit of the best interest of the working class in a kaleidoscope of ever-changing material conditions. So material conditions are just always changing, and a good Marxist evaluates those changes and adapts to them. And sometimes you're going to do it correctly, sometimes you're going to fail, but again, that process, that system is infinitely superior to the alternative Western system, because the Western system is just like that, only the inversion of it, where you identify and pursue the best interests of the ownership class in light of changing material conditions. So it's very similar, right? There's similar systems, but the difference is who you're intended to benefit, the working class majority or the ownership class minority. And so we can just see that in everything. And so, these Western Marxists, they turn everything on its head. And instead of a class struggle, a global class struggle, they see, no, it's just abstract authoritarianism versus freedom. That's really what matters. And you know what? We're more free here in the West than China is. So now we don't like the West because they're imperialists. So yeah, I'm not gonna say I like the West, but China is authoritarian and they're bad. This is kindergarten level thinking, and it just needs to be rejected. But I would say it's probably majority thinking, like in the West, of people who self-identify
Unfortunately.
as socialists or Marxists. That's kind of, I think, what most people look at things in those terms. And to me, that's just liberal. That's liberalism. It's ignoring the context of class struggle, ignoring the reality of class, and focusing on an abstract principle and championing some abstract principle in a vacuum. And that doesn't get us anywhere. That doesn't make any sense. And where it gets them is, supporting imperialism, pretending the pox on both your houses approach, where it's really they hate actual existing socialists more than they hate the empire.
Well,
I know.
as far as combating that pervasive thinking on the Western left, I wanted to shift gears a bit and just ask you about your recent provocative use of AI on social media to disseminate a lot of the things you've been discussing today, like your Marxist analysis and ideas with the use of AI generated memes, very cleverly, I might add, which I saw, was stirring a lot of debate online. Do you feel like that with I mean, the Western left also has I think, a particular attitude towards AI, the surrounding sort of consensus of pessimism about it as far as the impact of artificial intelligence. The whole public discourse about AI is obviously, legitimate concerns about the lack of regulation, the threat that it poses to economic security and jobs, and data privacy, obviously too. I guess with that sort of dominant discourse, though, do you feel like, with the way that you're employing it and the use value that you've found with it, do you think that the sort of critical revolutionary potential of AI is sort of being overlooked, and that it's just being that because the consensus on the left seems to be just very, very hostile to AI, and I have concerns myself, a lot of concerns about it, and obviously the environmental impact that it has. These are all legitimate questions. Do you think that the use of AI as a political tool is sort of being overlooked, and then that people should embrace it more? in the way that you are?
Yeah, no, I think everybody should be like me, of course. Um, you know, if I thought differently, I would be different, but um so no, there are so look, if we conceive of this whole thing as AI is a powerful tool and there's costs associated with this powerful tool. There's legitimate environmental economic security issues that you raise regarding this tool, but the bottom line is I don't have any control over the development of this tool. I can't stop this tool from being developed. So this tool exists. The development of this tool continues. And like any tool, it's going to be a weapon in the class struggle. And so I see the West trying to use this tool to benefit the interests of a tiny minority of psychopathic elites, the oligarch class, the transnational oligarch class. So they're trying to harness this tool to defeat China and to dominate the planet and to pacify the planet for their rule. So nobody can question, so they can behave with impunity. And China is also adopting this tool to benefit the interests of the working class majority. So I mean, AI in China is being harnessed to just really develop manufacturing, right? And there's this green energy boom. So China is the global leader in green energy, not only production but the using of green energy. So I think AI has a lot of potential. I think this is recognized by everyone, and then it's going to be a struggle to see who can best utilize this weapon to further the interests of, on the one hand, the oligarch class of the West, or humanity, which I would argue is being, the best for humanity is being pursued by, the axis of resistance, specifically China, but
Yeah,
also Russia and Iran.
yeah, I remember, I think I just saw something not too long ago saying that in China, they're placing regulations on the AI, like not letting it take a certain amount of jobs and, keeping that element of it in check.
No, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, again, as they, as this technology rolls out, that's going to be the challenge, and that's going to be the challenge for the Communist Party of China is to, minimize the negative external bad things, negative externalities, to minimize the amount of negative externalities and to maximize the benefit, for the people. But I wanted to speak specifically to my use of AI, and it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, with my ego, I am not happy when people say that you're stupid, you just use AI, right? Because that's annoying. And I want I feel like I want to challenge these people to a debate. I want to point them to the 10 years of writing that I had before I started using AI. But in reality, I've got to just let my ego, take a hit. And I'm going to unapologetically admit that AI is an incredible tool for rapidly, efficiently creating content that is far, far superior from what I could do on my own, with a caveat. So I would say that, as far as efficiency goes, there's just no comparison to the efficiency of it. As far as the quality content, I mean, obviously humans can still do things that AI can't. So I could put in effort and I can produce work that I would say is superior to what the AI does. Nevertheless, with how I engage on Facebook and how I do, like, I don't know if you'd call it activism, it's more arguing. Uh, but the arguing I do on Facebook is, it's AI is just, it's really a something, like it's so impressive. And, and so for me, I'm using DeepSeek primarily. And I'll also use Quinn, which is the other Chinese AI, but mostly DeepSeek, and they're both open source. I don't pay them anything. And what I can do on a given thread is, really, you can have a conversation with AI for a long time, and then it'll tell you, okay, this thread is ended. You got to start a new one. But at the very beginning, you can kind of tell the AI what you want from it, and you could explain to the AI what you are, what you do, what your framework is, and then they are really incredibly good at embracing that framework, understanding it, and just responding to whatever you give to it in that framework, and it's just really incredible. And so if you see me on Facebook, and now here's the thing, I want to brag about my Facebook. I have never once asked anyone to follow me, and I haven't ever. I've sent very few friend requests, but I've never once asked anyone to, hey, follow me. I've never said that. And now, again, Facebook is a very pathetic social media. Like, there's a much bigger reach on Twitter and TikTok. Those, I mean, you can reach way more people. But as far
Yeah.
as Facebook goes and individuals, like I think I'm up to like 8,000 followers, and most of those came before I started using AI. And what was my point? Just to brag about my Facebook followers, maybe. I don't remember. But no, so I think it's a valuable tool. And so I don't know if it's the algorithm of Facebook, but I know that they're being a lot nicer to me recently, and like my posts, a lot of them. So, and what I started doing is, they said that your post will have a farther reach if you put an image. And so, whether or not I use AI in my post, or whether it's something that I just write myself, it's, I don't know, maybe 50-50 at this point. I always go to AI and have them produce an image illustrating whatever I wrote about. And so basically, I mean, the algorithm is very nice. Like, I've seen a big increase in the amount of reach that my posts are getting. And but what was my point? I had a bigger point, and then I got lost. I had a bigger
Well,
point.
the reason I brought it up is because I feel like, I mean, it's the source of the sort of hostility towards AI. I mean, obviously, from a Marxist point of view, the function of AI under the ruling class and capitalism is to do what it does with everything else, to extract surplus value from exploited labor. Obviously, the threat of job security is a legitimate concern as far as de-skilling workers goes, and it's all about enforcing corporate control. But I guess with the focus on solely its negative impact, to me it seems like you could trace that to this sort of emphasis on, that the Western left has really taken up as far as like the whole issue of, well, the something that really sort of does run contrary to the whole notion of classical Marxism and human progress, like the sort of emphasis on degrowth and the ecological unsustainability of something like AI because of all the environmental damage it's doing. Like, for example, the backlash against data centers right now. I mean, obviously that's a huge concern, and it is causing a lot of ecological impact. But I think that, like, rather than addressing, how we can reorganize the economy in a way that serves people and does less damage to the environment, it's just this sort of like Luddite, we need to, get rid of this technology somehow when it's here to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. And
And
rather than understanding it dialectically, I think people are missing its revolutionary potential, and I think that a
That's what I was
conversation
trying to
needs
say.
to be had.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you.
and I can't And I can't help but thinking because, the AI is so good at collating massive amounts of data, how a tool like that would be really helpful trying to have a centrally planned socialist economy because it could collate all the economic data and then you could see what needs to be allotted where, and it would be a helpful tool in that respect. And I think, there's a lot of, I feel like, we're in this live in the social media day and age where like any kind of attention is good attention. So there's been so much scaremongering around the AI making the singularity and replacing humanity, but it's just giving like Elon Musk's AI platform more attention, I think. And because I don't think it really
Well,
can
and
replace humanity.
it's taking
A
attention off
tool.
of the real damage that it's doing right now, especially with like the whole narrative, like that's been out there, that this fear that it's going to become conscious or sentient, and
Skynet, Skynet's gonna kill us.
yeah, that it's like Terminator, it's like Skynet. Meanwhile, the ruling class, which has the, controls the means of AI production, is reaping in huge profits and exploiting people using it and destroying the environment. So like it just seems like there's a lot of smoke and mirrors around AI, and that people are not seeing the bigger picture, and that or having any kind of dialectical understanding about it. And to me, I think that the root of it, the environmental movement and its correlation with the Western left, there's I don't want to say Malthusianism, but the emphasis on degrowth,
Yeah.
and all that does run contrary to the whole classical Marxist.
Yeah, no, I run into that a lot. A lot of the critics are making that argument, you're killing the environment. You're taking jobs from, actual artists with your AI images and, but no, I just kind of dismiss them because I don't think they have a rational or logical approach. And so I think a rational, logical approach, it's a tool, we have to harness it and use it, in furtherance of the global class struggle, which takes all kinds of dimensions, but really just spreading awareness and trying to explain to people what is going on, and how we should perceive of all these things that are happening, because there's a lot going on. But I want to talk about this a tech bubble. So the United States has a tech bubble. It's being driven by AI and the data centers. It's being driven by SpaceX, and then there's a couple other companies, big companies, that are going to have an initial public offering. Of course, SpaceX just did, and there's two more coming. Now, it's really interesting. And so what I see happening here is that this bubble is going to burst. And so what they did very recently with allowing SpaceX onto the NASDAQ 100, they waived a whole bunch of rules and regulations that are usually applicable to these big corporations, where they have to prove that they're profitable. They have to prove that the numbers that they're using are justifiable in fact. And so there was really some stringent regulations that got waived to allow SpaceX onto the NASDAQ 100. But the reason they did that was because once you're on this SpaceX, the NASDAQ 100, everybody's 401k and retirement is pretty much obligated to buy into it. So any hedge fund manager has a fiduciary responsibility, depending on the terms in the agreement, to mirror the the NASDAQ 100. And so they're really, it's a shift. So they're putting a floor underneath their company SpaceX, and they're going to do it with two more big, huge industries that are at the forefront of this tech bubble. So they're inflating the tech bubble. They're going to put the working class on the hook for this tech bubble, and then all the wealthy owners of these, of the majority of the stocks, are going to exit and liquidate, and it's going to be a crash. And it's going to not harm the ownership class. It's going to harm the working class in the form of our retirements and our 401ks. That again, most of them are forced legally to buy into all of the corporations that comprise the NASDAQ 100. But this rules change again was just a giveaway, and so you're going to see it with two more. So I think they understand that this tech bubble is going to burst. I think they're trying to put an escape hatch, for the billionaires that own these things, and they're going to socialize the losses through, it's going to cause damage. They're going to disperse the damage across the country. The hundreds of millions of workers with 401ks are going to take the hit. And this will be bad for the economy. But this is the kind of crisis I see that we're headed to. And the question is the time frame. And an interesting benchmark is the November midterm elections. I mean, this will be pivotal. And I can't prophesy. I don't know if it's going to happen before or after, or if they're going to wait for Trump to leave. Like, these are all things that I think are dependent upon a lot of variables, and there's no set in stone answer. But I think we're set for a global economic catastrophe and a domestic economic catastrophe, and then a state of crisis. And this state of crisis will be used to justify really aggressive maneuvers against China, in the South China Sea, and tightening that noose, and really just a global conflagration that might not look that dissimilar from World War II. So, for instance, I think another proxy war using Japan, using the Philippines specifically, where the Philippines is like Ukraine, and South Korea and Japan are like Europe. You know, I think this is the future that they're really heading us towards, and I don't think there's much of an off ramp. Like, I think this is just going to happen, and so the best thing we can do is talk about it, discuss it, point it out before it happens, and then when it does, we can try and explain, hey, it was pretty obvious. If you have the proper framework and you're not caught in liberal dogma where the government is trying to further the best interest of the citizenry, because that fairy tale just isn't reality. It's totally detached from reality. So the government, is figuring out how they can, extricate the Western oligarchs from an intractable situation. And who's going to sacrifice? This effort is going to cause pain. It's going to cause the working class to sacrifice. And that's that's why the system needs to improve. That's why we need to change the system. That's why we need a system like China's system, where the government is a representative of the working class and uses its authority not to benefit the oligarchs, but to benefit the working class and to discipline the oligarchs. And so that's basic Marxism. And so Western Marxists that, just deal with this abstract authoritarianism and say, no, I don't like China. They're authoritarian. Like, yeah, they use their authority to benefit the working class at the expense of the oligarch class. But
What
I'm
you
running
were
out of steam, guys, running out of steam.
what you were describing about the tech bubble was a very frightening prognostication, but also eerily similar to the 2008 housing bubble, and the way that, the 2008 crash, the way that Main Street was, or the big banks were bailed out, and then Main Wall Street was bailed out, but not Main Street, and so many people lost their home. But now they're coming for, for obviously for Social Security and Medicaid, and so much of the people's retirement plans. I mean, so much of their saving. I mean, that's all going to be on the chopping block, and this endless cyclical crisis with capitalism, and that it's just going to keep going, and people are just going to keep suffering until it's replaced with a whole new system altogether. And it's just madness. But yeah, that's a frightening crystal ball that you were looking into, that you just laid out for us there, as far as, because I do feel like something's coming down the pipe. I didn't have a fully grasp I mean, a lot of the stuff involving the stock market is a foreign language to me, even though I actually have read all three volumes of Capital, still reading about economics, like, and like when I heard about that Musk had become a trillionaire, and that SpaceX was being was on NASDAQ. I mean, that I didn't fully understand the implications or ramifications of that, but I trust your analysis, and that does seem like something I've
Well,
seen other people
yeah.
predicting, unfortunately.
SpaceX actually provides value, and but still they're overvalued by like a factor of 2 at least, right? So the valuation that they said they had when they went to their initial public offering was not as egregious. The thing with AI and all the Western AI, they're realizing there is no path to profitability. And this is the problem, because this is keeping our economy afloat. The tech bubble has kept our economy afloat, and it is dawning on people, because of open source Chinese AI, that there is no path to profitability for all these data centers. Billions and billions and billions invested into data centers, and they're not coming online as scheduled. There's been thousands of them invested in, and supposedly, it's the future, right? And this bubble is going to burst, because they're realizing there is no way to make this AI profitable. So SpaceX is a little bit different because they do have a monopoly on putting satellites into space in the West. But still, they're nowhere near as valuable as they claimed when they did the
And
IPO.
is that attributable? I'm sorry, I'm genuinely asking because I don't, a lot of this stuff goes over my head. Is that because Chinese AI is outperforming all the Western variants or Western models?
I mean, when you run,
Or is it because of the widespread backlash? I mean, I know a lot of these planned data centers have not materialized because of public outcry, right? So is it a variety of factors?
interesting. I don't think the public outcry is doing anything. I saw a post today that said Trump declared each of these centers to be a military facility, which I assumed was true. Because again, it's all integrated. Like this is all part of a militarization and a ramp up, to defeat China, and it's part of consolidating our economy and turning it into more of a command economy. And so, but the problem is, yeah, so the profitability aspect of the next two corporations that are going to be giving an IPO very soon, I think later this month, they're going to do an initial public offering, and it's going to be the same exact. They're going to be hosted by the NASDAQ instead of the New York Stock Exchange, and the NASDAQ has agreed to waive all of these fiduciary requirements that normal corporations need to get on there. So we're going to see, two more huge corporations following. And again, this is about outsourcing the losses, socializing the losses, and then privatizing. And by this, these IPOs are going to be going on the Nasdaq 100, and it's going to just make the bubble even bigger. Is the point? It's already a tremendously overvalued bubble. They're going to make it even bigger, but when they make it bigger, again, they're making it bigger by getting normal people to have to buy in. So your retirements are going to have to buy in, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
And
but
is that because Congress has green lighted that? Like, what is what piece of legislation would block that? I mean, obviously there wasn't any democratic decision made by the public to allow
well, the Nasdaq is a private entity, but individual retirement accounts are governed by like a prospectus, and most prospectuses are just generic, and they just say, "Hey, I want you to mimic the Nasdaq 100." And
yeah.
so and so that's where, and there's a law in like 1942 that says, a hedge fund manager is fiduciary responsible to do that. And so so he's like, so that there is an actual legal aspect of this forced buy-in to the Nasdaq 100. And I have a post that explains it in writing, and it's a little bit more clear and detailed. But the point is, the West is losing the tech war. Chinese AI is open source, and on certain metrics, it might be a lag a little bit behind Western AI on certain metrics. But if you look at the cost that they put into it and the cost that we put into it, like they blow us out of the water, and for 99% of things, they're just as effective. And so that's what they're finding, that what they thought their consumers were going to be are just choosing the open source Chinese AI because they can do everything they can with the for pay USA. So that's what I'm saying. There's no path to profitability. And as this secret gets out and they realize that these billions and billions and billions are getting invested and they're never going to be recouped, now they're trying to find an exit. Now they're trying to outsource it onto your 401k, and you're going to see this bubble's going to burst.
Is that why people were saying that, people like Peter Thiel were moving to Argentina, like that was
could
like
be.
a sign, an ominous sign that like the US is about to collapse, and I don't know. Just putting that out there.
No, that's weird that he would go to Argentina. I mean, I guess, Javier Milei and his anarcho-capitalism, where they're eating donkey meat and accepting 40 billion in handouts to stay afloat from
Yeah.
yeah. But we ridicule these competing ideologies, right? Like libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, like these are competing ideologies, competing frameworks, competing ways to explain reality and what is going on and why. And I think just having that debate, it's kind of what I do on Facebook and social media. It's like I try and present a particular framework, and I try and expose how this is a better way of understanding reality. And your framework is actually kind of a lie. You're kind of believing in a narrative that people are deliberately telling you, so you don't know what the fuck is going on. And in a very weird sense, it's like the ruling class has a strategy of maintaining themselves as the ruling class by spreading mental illness, because that's what they're doing. They're detaching people's minds from objective reality and getting them to think in an idealistic way that has nothing to do with what really takes place. And that's like mental illness. And then the way these people seize upon these narratives and think that they're true, and how they respond with hostility to alternative perspectives instead of just considering them. I mean, that's just mental illness. And then I saw a ring. I saw a ring video from a lady in Britain, and the whole thing was captured. She was like a neighbor, and she rang somebody's doorbell, and she started talking to him and explaining to him that his Chinese electric vehicle was gonna destroy their society, because it was Chinese surveillance, and she was trying to shame him for his car, his Chinese electric vehicle. Like, that's mental illness. So they're really perpetuating their rule by just spreading misinformation, false information, and what ultimately can be described, in my opinion, as mental illness. So I just think there's a rational, sensible way to make sense of things, and I think that rational, sensible, reality-based way is Marxism. And when we use that framework to figure out what's going on, like the future looks good, because I think China is ultimately going to be victorious. But the West, has some power, and they have some say in how their own decline takes place. And it just seems like they're going to ensure that their own decline is going to be a tragedy, for all of humanity. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. And again, we're like at the very beginning. I am prognosticating things, because the government right now is doing a lot to make sure that we don't feel like a crisis is happening. They're going out of their way to keep us thinking things are normal, everything's fine, there's no crisis. And I think that's going to change. And just like with the COVID pandemic, and when there's a real crisis, they're really good at flipping the script. And I think that's going to be coming right around the corner. It could happen before the midterms. It could happen after the midterms. I definitely think before Trump leaves, they want to use him as both the arsonist, and then they're going to scapegoat him, and say that's all Trump. And then the Democrats are going to come behind him and offer an alternative. But it's not, it's going to be more of the same, just with a different hat and a different face. It's probably going to be a multi-year conflagration where they're just, things are going to change for the worse. There's going to be crises, and they're going to be doing their best to, weaken, those countries that are not going to bow their knee. Do they bow knees, or take a knee, bow their heads? Like China, Russia, and Iran. Anyway, it's very interesting times to be alive. Somebody said something like, centuries will go by and nothing will happen, and then a couple days will go by and centuries happen. I'm a paraphrasing, of course, and that kind of seems like where we're at. So have me back. Have me back when I can say I told you so, because I really can't say I told you so. I'm just trying to explain what I think is inevitable. But I'm certain that the I told you so won't take long, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a catastrophe crisis impending. And I just wanted to ask you one final question, though, since you brought up competing ideologies. And I know on your YouTube channel, you've debated people who are not Marxist. For example, you've debated libertarians. And I'm just curious, do you think that as Marxists, we need to stop? And I don't mean us specifically, but I mean, this is really a problem among Western quote unquote Marxists. We're focusing on only working within the left and like refusing to engage with people with other viewpoints. But do you think it's important to engage with people with other viewpoints so as to break out of like an echo chamber of sorts? I'm just curious.
No, of course, and that's a challenge, though. But that's our challenge. I mean, our challenge is to develop and organize a political force that is powerful enough to, make real change. And so, in this country, that just seems insurmountable. Like that seems like way too big of a hill to ever accomplish. And I get that. But I think that once the material conditions change for people, once people don't have the luxury of complacency and comfort, they might be more open to learning. And so right now, I bang my head against the wall on a regular basis, trying to. I honestly feel, and what does it sound? Presumptuous and narcissistic that I am trying to educate people, but that's literally how I see what I'm doing, and it's a struggle. And I've had a lot of success. Like people reach out to me and say, "Wow, that makes a lot of fucking sense," and I think it does. But most people do not. Most people are beholden to their own personal indoctrination, and they're going to resist any kind of additional knowledge that contradicts that. And so that's the challenge. We have to, get better. Like this show, I appreciate the opportunity to practice my grandstanding, my lecturing, and to try and get more persuasive, and just get better at trying to communicate things and to raise awareness and to help people have a better understanding. But it's indispensable. Like that is really what we have to do. So we can't just stay in our own little echo chamber, with people that agree with us. We have to seek out and reach out others and try and engage with them and just to share, in a hopefully friendly, enjoyable way. Because I enjoy, talking. Like who doesn't enjoy hearing themselves talk? But you know, it's I really think that as insurmountable as it seems now, if and when material conditions significantly change and there's really something big going on, people might be more open. And so it's just going to be good. What the work that we're doing now is going to make us better when the opportunity opens up. And plus we can always point back and say, look, I've been saying this for, a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I have been willing to allow, like, for example, my writing to appear on web. I've mostly been published in, left-wing alternative media publications, but I took a lot of flack for allowing Ron Unz to cross-post my article on his website,
Oh,
the Unz
I,
Review,
I support you. That was great. I mean,
which, granted, the Unz Review has all kinds of really
yeah,
objectionable even outright racist content, and certainly the comment section is filled with mentally ill people. But you know what? Like, there's a lot of libertarians on there. There were other leftists, and I just looked at it like if I even get one person out there to look at something slightly differently and change their mind about something, to me, it's worth it. This idea that it's like dangerous for us to be interact. I mean, politics is dangerous. I mean, it's the necessary work to be done, and if people are not willing to do it, they shouldn't be going around calling themselves Marxists, as far as I'm concerned. No, that doesn't mean that you endorse what's being said. I mean, but at the same time, a lot of these kind of leftists that will say that they'll have no problem, like when somebody of the actual left variety like gets into a mainstream publication like the New York Times or something, like that's okay to be published there,
yeah,
paper that propagandizes for war. But if you appear alongside libertarians or do anything like that, it's like it's dangerous. You're enabling, the second rise of fascism or something like that. But no, I think that we absolutely have to engage with people, and you can find certainly on single issues, uh, common ground, and build a movement based, or, certainly around something like an anti-war movement. But no, we absolutely have to engage with people and
I
get the
I think that
things.
I was just going to say, I think that especially when liberal ideology is literally being refuted by material reality, there are sort of a crisis of liberalism, one could say. If we don't do work trying to educate people and spread awareness, essentially, that's that sort of crisis in liberal ideology without the presence of a Marxist analysis is what lends people to turn to mystical, obscurantist, fascist ideologies.
Yeah, it drives them into their arms, I would argue.
And that's what we're seeing. Like I've written about that. It's like, how can anybody still be a liberal? Like, do you see what's going on? Like no, liberalism is a lie. It's the facade of oligarchy. It's like Christianity was the facade of hereditary monarchy. It was God ordained, and then liberalism is the same narrative that facilitates oligarchy, and that's just so obvious now. I don't know how anybody can see the crisis of liberalism and still think that liberal values mean anything to any government.
Well, Billy Bob, you
Yeah.
said that you want to you wanted us to have you back on after this impending global economic collapse happens. Hopefully that will not happen.
Yeah.
But we would love to have you back on in the future. Hopefully it's not under those circumstances, but given the way things are going, that very well may be the case. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But we probably should get wrapping up soon. It's been a great discussion. I think where can before we go though, tell us where people can follow your work. And you've got a Substack, and I know you got a Facebook page and the YouTube channel. It's Blowback Exposing Imperial Decline, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna need you to invite me back 9 more times before you come back on my program. Shaenah, you're welcome anytime because I owe you one, but
Oh,
Max
thank
still
you.
owes Max still owes me nine. Yes. So exposing imperial decline. It's a blowback colon exposing imperial decline is the YouTube. And then I have my own YouTube channel, my personal YouTube channel, and then the one dedicated to the show. And then Facebook is really where I primarily post. It's such a bad social media. Like it's really bad for reaching people. It's probably the worst one. Like Twitter is way bigger. But my Twitter is like nobody. I have hardly any followers on Twitter. I never got going on Twitter.
No, I'm the same
I
way.
guess it's X.
I have like on Facebook, I have like a decent sized following, several thousand people. But on X, I've had absolutely no luck in building a following. I mean, I know that it is obviously has a much wider audience breadth, but as far as like, I really do feel like the algorithmic censorship there is also pretty bad. But
I
yeah.
think it got worse. I think it got a lot worse on X recently.
Hmm.
And TikTok, of course, got really bad, right? Larry Ellison, I think, or his son bought it, and
Hmm.
then they just switched up the algorithm. So, nevertheless, there's some good comrades who have done really good on X, and like their work is just way more powerful than my work, just because of the number of people they're reaching. And I'm really restricted to this Facebook, but yeah, no, please, Facebook is the best way because everything I do is on Facebook. A lot of things I'll cross post to Substack, like you said. I don't even know. I know my profile picture on Substack is, an image of our Lord and Savior Joseph Stalin. It is also the same one that I use for Facebook and Twitter or X. And so that's how you'll know
It's
it's me.
I'm with him. It's the reference
Yeah,
to the Hillary Clinton
yeah.
campaign in 2016. I'm with her, but you've got
I
on.
ran into the people that actually designed it. I just appropriated it, but they designed it and they did it in jest. They weren't fans of Stalin, and I just took it and ran with it. But the
Oh, okay, I see. I didn't realize that that makes it even better. I thought, okay, I thought that you had actually made that yourself, but
that would
it's the
probably
right
have been better.
wing fear mongering about Democrats being communists. Now I see. That's great. Well, we'll post links to your social
Yeah,
media accounts,
that
and
would be great.
hopefully you'll at least get a couple more followers, and to your Substack articles as well that we discussed. And yeah, as far as we go, if you're watching us on YouTube, we have a Substack page. It's shaenahbatterson.substack.com. If you're watching us on Substack, we have a YouTube channel. It's Captive Minds X, or I'm sorry, it's Captive Minds Pod. And then we also have an X page where people can follow us. It's Captive Minds X. Billy Bob, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot. This was a great discussion. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We'd love to have you on again soon. Shaenah, do
Next
you
week.
have
Let's do
final
it next week.
thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This really has been a great episode. And I just wanted to say, yeah, your profile image, that's great. That's even funnier that you appropriated it. So and keep
Thank you
up
guys
the
for having me on. I think my daughter has her sixth to seventh. She's graduating sixth grade, and I gotta hurry and get there.
Okay, well, congratulations on that. That's great.
So I'll see you guys soon. I look forward to my invite back.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
we'd
you
love to have you
for
back. Thank you for
yeah,
coming
for sure.
on.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and watching and listening to Captive Minds. We'll be back soon. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Take
Bye.
care, Billy Bob.